All right, let's dive into the world of J. Krishnamurti. We're taking a look at his ideas on consciousness, thought, intelligence, and how all that ties into, well, living a better life. Krishnamurti doesn't waste any time. He jumps right into this idea of examining the content of our own consciousness. And he uses this really vivid image. He says, there is no house if there are no walls and no roof. The content is consciousness. It's like he's saying to understand ourselves, we got to understand what's filling up our inner world.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's pointing to our beliefs, experiences, memories, all the stuff that makes us us. And he's saying that to truly know ourselves, we need to examine those pieces. What are the walls and the roof of your inner world made of?
And then he goes even further, and this is where it gets really interesting. He asks if consciousness can ever be emptied of all that content. It's kind of, I don't know, daunting.
It's definitely a big idea and a challenging one. But it's not about like forcefully denying your thoughts and feelings. It's more about understanding them,
Hmm.
seeing their limitations and working towards maybe transforming them. It's kind of like decluttering your house. You don't just smash everything. You look at what you have, what you need, what's not really serving you, and then you decide what to keep and what to let go of.
I like that analogy.
Yeah,
But yeah, it definitely takes effort, right? It's not going to happen overnight. You can't just like wish for an empty consciousness.
for sure. Now, this brings us to another key thing, the role of thought. Krishnamurti says thought is necessary. We need it for practical stuff, like not touching a hot stove.
Yeah, the basics.
Exactly. But he also points out that thought has its limitations. It can only take us so far. He says thought is mechanical because it is repetitive, conforming, comparing.
Hmm.
And it's this mechanical, repetitive nature that can actually create problems for us.
So it's not that thinking is bad. It's more like we can get stuck in certain patterns of thought.
Exactly. And those patterns can lead to all sorts of issues within ourselves and how we interact with the world. We get caught up in those labels, those differences, instead of seeing the shared humanity that connects us all.
That's definitely something to think about. Or maybe something to just become aware of without immediately slapping a label on it. It makes me wonder, am I letting my own thoughts build unnecessary barriers in my life?
It's a good question to ask yourself. And this is where Krishnamurti's idea of intelligence comes in. He separates thought from intelligence, saying, thought is of time, intelligence is not of time. He's suggesting that there's another way of perceiving the world, one that goes beyond our usual thought processes, and he calls this intelligence.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Can you give me an example of what that looks like in practice?
Sure, so imagine looking at a tree, really seeing it, not labeling it in your mind as a tree, not thinking about its size or type or whatever, just directly experiencing it, taking in its colors, the texture of the bark, how the light hits the leaves. That direct perception, without all the mental chatter, that's a glimpse of what he means by intelligence.
It's like you're bypassing all the filters of your mind and just experiencing the tree in its essence. You're not thinking about it, you're just being with it.
Exactly. And this actually leads us to Krishnamurti's approach to meditation. He sees meditation as a way to develop a quiet, attentive mind, a mind that can observe without judgment, without getting in its own way. It's about making space for that intelligence to emerge.
He has this great quote about it. He says, so first I have to learn to look, not make an effort to look. I must find out what it means to look. It's like he's saying that simply paying attention, really observing, is a skill we can develop.
Right, and that skill can be used in everything, not just formal meditation. Even something like listening to someone, really listening, can be a form of meditation.
So by becoming more aware, more observant, we can potentially tap into this intelligence that Krishnamurti talks about. It seems like that could lead to a very different way of experiencing life.
Absolutely, that's the core of it. It's not about getting rid of thought, it's about understanding its place and creating space for a different way of seeing things, a different way of being in the world.
This has given me a lot to think about already. But I got to say, Krishnamurti's ideas, they're pretty challenging.
Yeah.
It's going to take some real effort to put them into practice.
He knew that. He knew they weren't easy. He says to find out what living is, we must not only have energy, but also learn to observe, learn to be aware. He's not offering simple solutions. He's inviting us on a journey of self-discovery. And that journey begins with becoming aware of our own consciousness, understanding the role of thought, and seeing the possibility of something beyond thought, this intelligence he talks about.
So much to consider here. So where do we go from here?
Okay, so we've talked about how our consciousness is kind of shaped by its content and how thought can be both useful and limiting. It can keep us from accessing a deeper kind of intelligence. And I'm really intrigued by this idea of moving beyond those limitations, but how do we actually do that?
Well, Krishnamurti was very clear that real change, it doesn't come from just adopting beliefs or following some set of rules. It's a much deeper process, a process of self-discovery.
And he uses that phrase a lot, you must find out. What do you think he means by that?
I think he's saying you got to become your own investigator, like really question your assumptions, look at your own thoughts and feelings, and through that process, you come to a direct understanding of yourself and the world around you.
That sounds like a challenge, and maybe even a little uncomfortable, you know? He talks about facing those fears and anxieties, those insecurities we all have, facing them head on. He does, because he believes that real freedom comes from facing those things, not avoiding them. And I think a lot of times we cling to beliefs or ideologies or even external authorities because they offer us a sense of security, of comfort. But those things can also prevent us from really understanding ourselves and living a more fulfilling life.
So it's about having the courage to look inward, even when it's tough.
Exactly. It's about developing a kind of inner honesty, a willingness to see things as they are, without judgment or denial.
It definitely takes energy.
Hmm.
He makes it clear that self-inquiry is not passive. It requires a real commitment to understanding and transformation.
Yeah, it does, and it's very closely connected to this idea of living in the present moment. Krishnamurti talks about how thought often pulls us out of the present. We're either dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Right? It's like we're never really here. We're always lost in thought, thinking about what was or what might be.
Exactly, and he links that to the difference between thought and intelligence. Remember how he says, thought is of time, intelligence is not of time. If we're always caught up in our thoughts, we miss out on that direct experience of life, the flow of intelligence that's available to us in the present moment.
It reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with meditation. Could you say more about how Krishnamurti viewed meditation?
Yeah, he saw it as a way to become more present, more aware of what's happening within us and around us. And it's not about escaping from the world. It's about developing a quiet, attentive mind, a mind that can observe without judgment, without interference.
So it's about being present not just during meditation, but in all parts of life.
Exactly. In our relationships, our work, how we interact with the world, it's about bringing that same quality of attention, of awareness to everything we do.
It's not about becoming some emotionless robot. It's about becoming more sensitive, more in tune with ourselves and others, more open, more compassionate, more loving.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it leads us to one of the most profound and maybe most challenging aspects of Krishnamurti's teaching, the nature of love. He challenges us to really examine our ideas about love, which are often based on attachment, need, fear of loss.
Yeah, it seems like he's suggesting that real love, it's something much deeper than that. It goes beyond those ego-centered desires and attachments.
Exactly. He talks about a love that's free from attachment, free from need or dependency, a love that's rooted in a profound understanding of ourselves and the interconnectedness of all things, a love that flows naturally from a heart that's free from fear and judgment.
It's a radical concept. It goes against so much of what we're taught about love.
It does. It requires a real shift in perspective. It's not something you can force or achieve through willpower. It arises organically from an inner transformation, from a state of being that's grounded in awareness, intelligence, and a deep sense of connection with everything.
Okay, so we've been exploring some really big concepts here. Consciousness, thought, intelligence, even love. But I think the question a lot of people have at this point is, how does this translate into daily life? How do we actually bring these ideas into our experience and create the kind of change Krishnamurti is talking about?
It's a great question, and Krishnamurti does offer some guidance on that. He talks a lot about observation, but not just passively observing. He means actively paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, our reactions, how we interact with everything around us.
So it's almost like becoming a researcher of our own inner world.
Yeah, exactly. We observe those thoughts and feelings without judgment, trying to understand where they come from, how they shape our perceptions and our actions. It's about developing self-awareness.
And he also talks about questioning everything, our beliefs, assumptions, those ingrained ways of thinking. And I don't think he means it in a cynical way. It's more about approaching life with a sense of curiosity, an open mind, a willingness to see things from different perspectives.
Right, and that questioning, it extends beyond our internal world, too. It influences how we interact with the world around us, how we respond to challenges, how we engage in relationships, how we make decisions. All of these become opportunities for observation and conscious action.
So it's not about withdrawing from the world, becoming some kind of isolated hermit. It's about bringing that awareness and intelligence into our engagement with everything.
Exactly. Krishnamurti emphasizes that we're all interconnected. Our thoughts, our words, our actions, they all have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves. He encourages us to consider the impact of our actions, not just on ourselves, but on the whole.
That makes me think about the idea of freedom that he talks about so much. He seems like he's saying that true freedom, it's not about our external circumstances, it's about an internal state of being.
I think that's right. He says we often look for freedom in external things, possessions, status, power. But he suggests that real freedom, it comes from freeing ourselves from the limitations of our own minds, the limiting beliefs, the fears, the conditioning, all the things that keep us trapped in those cycles of suffering.
So it's about becoming masters of our own minds rather than being slaves to our thoughts and impulses.
Exactly. He speaks about a freedom that comes from understanding the nature of thought, seeing its limitations, recognizing that we are not our thoughts, we have the power to choose how we respond to them, to step back from that mental chatter and access a deeper level of awareness.
Which brings us back to this idea of intelligence beyond thought, this idea that we can experience the world in a way that's not limited by our usual thought patterns. It's a really powerful idea, and it makes me wonder, how do we cultivate that kind of freedom and awareness in our lives?
Krishnamurti might say it begins by recognizing the limitations of the ego, that sense of self that we often cling to as the center of our universe.
It's like we build walls around ourselves trying to protect this separate self. But those walls also limit our capacity for connection, for love, for really experiencing life fully.
Exactly. And he suggests that when we can let go of that clinging to the ego, we open ourselves to a different way of being in the world, a way that's more interconnected, more compassionate, and ultimately more fulfilling.
It's not about denying our individuality, but recognizing that our true selves, they're not limited to these individual egos. We're part of something much larger.
That's the essence of it, recognizing our interconnectedness with all things, and that realization can lead to some really profound shifts in our perceptions, our actions, our relationships with the world.
Well, this has definitely given me a lot to think about. Krishnamurti's ideas, they're challenging, but also incredibly insightful. And honestly, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
And that's the beauty of it, right? His work, it's not about blind faith or following someone else's teachings. It's about a personal journey of self-discovery, a willingness to question, and a commitment to living with awareness, intelligence, and love. It's about awakening that potential that we all have within us for a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
So, as always, it's up to you to see what resonates, what challenges you, what inspires you on your own unique path. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning, and see what incredible discoveries you make along the way.